In 1906, President Teddy Roosevelt created the nation's first national monument designation. The purpose of this designation was to preserve for all Americans significant pieces of the country's history, ecology, geology, and beauty. All national monuments are designated by U.S. presidents and are chosen as their personal memorials of those most special parts of this great country. Memorials that they see a need to protect over all others. Some are big, some are small. Some garner large budgets and staff. Others, next to none. All were chosen by presidents who considered them the most important places to protect over all other places in the country. America's national monuments tell the story of the nation's past and present glory. Hello, I'm Jordan Murphy, and I'll be your guide as we visit 11 national monuments located in America's Pacific Northwest. The Pacific Northwest was once a land of abundant natural resources. The two monuments in this program are living sanctuaries for this once great biodiversity. Cabrillo National Monument preserves one of the rarest ecosystems in North America, a unique combination of plants and animals found nowhere else on the planet.
Great cities often have great parks, but none quite like Cabrillo National Monument on San Diego's Point Loma Peninsula. It is 400 feet high and surrounded by the Pacific Ocean on the west and San Diego Bay on the east. The peninsula is perhaps the only undisturbed piece of Southern California's native chaparral plant community left. It is a plant community that once extended from the Mexican border to north of San Francisco. This little peninsula is a true island of biological diversity. Set aside by President Woodrow Wilson in 1913, the monument is often cloaked each morning in a mystical shroud of fog. The ocean below is barely visible. The old lighthouse shimmers in and out of view. A ghostly reminder of a time over 100 years ago when it guided ships into San Diego Harbor. Inside, the original magnifying prisms still reflect the emerging rays of the morning sun. The sun suddenly breaks through the fog. At last, the glimmering white lighthouse is exposed in all its glory. The waves crashing against the rocks along the rugged coast of the western edge of the peninsula now glisten in the sunlight. From the east side of the peninsula, the city of San Diego is clearly visible across the bay. A bay watched over by the gleaming white sculpture of Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, the monument's namesake. In 1542, Juan Cabrillo, a Portuguese explorer captaining a Spanish ship, became the first European to set foot on the west coast of what would become the state of California. Landing near the present-day monument, he claimed this land for Spain. Today, the monument not only commemorates the area's early Spanish history, but it is one of the nation's most important geographical pockets of California's natural history. The west shoreline at Point Loma tells the story of its long geographical history. The layers seen here clearly delineate the ocean sediments that were laid down over 70 million years ago during the Cretaceous period. Then, more recently, as part of California's coastal mountain building process, the peninsula was raised up by faulting, resulting from the Pacific Plate crashing into the North American continent. Below these ancient cliffs is one of the best intertidal ecosystems in the region, an intertidal zone that is open to visitors. Andrea Compton is a park naturalist.
So we are now down in the rocky intertidal area, and I wanted to point out some of the unique special animals that are here. We are sitting in the area where it's high zone. So if you can imagine, as the tides go in and out twice a day, that there are certain areas, like where I'm sitting right now, that oftentimes is exposed to the sunlight, to the sun, to the air. As we go farther out, there's areas that are underwater more of the time. So you can imagine that the animals and the plants have to adapt to different things. And up here we have some animals that are more adapted to being out in the air more. But we also have these little pockets of water that still remain, so animals can still breathe in those. And these are what we call our tide pools, and are worth taking some time and looking and exploring a little bit. If we start to look down in this place, at first glance you might say, oh, that's just a rock. What is there to look at? But the closer you look, the more that you will see. So as I look down here, I see several different things. On one hand, we have chitons that are kind of a long, narrow, they look like they have bars on them, and they're down in the bottom of the rock. We also have a variety of limpet species, different sizes, different shapes. One of the biggest limpets that we have here is called an owl limpet. And this guy actually defends a territory. So you can imagine, as the tide comes in and covers them up, they actually come out and they patrol their territory, and they will bump other limpets out of the way to keep them out of there. So they need the area to graze and to eat algae off the rocks. Here's a crab that is eating algae with its pinchers. So there are crabs that are tucked in here. There's quite a diversity of little snails that are moving about or in place. And then we also have things that are more stable. Here's a mussel right here. We also have some barnacles. Here's some gooseneck barnacles. So these guys stay closed when the tide is out, and when the tide comes in, they open up and send out their tentacles to start to feed. There's also some sea anemones. So again, they stay closed up, and when the water comes in, they open up and start to feed with their tentacles.
The backbone of the peninsula, and much of the monument, is home to a variety of scrub communities. Called chaparrals by the Spanish, these communities consist of low-lying shrubs, cactus, yucca, along with an assortment of reptiles, all adapted to Western California's unique Mediterranean climate. It is a climate where all the rain comes in the cool winter months. From late spring into fall, it's hot and dry with no rain. The native plants in Southern California are perfectly adapted to these long, harsh, dry periods.
So as you look around, you start to see certain adaptations for the plants that can do that. And here we have a couple cactuses that I wanted to point out. The type of vegetation that we are in now is called maritime succulent scrub. The ocean is just to our west, so we get these strong ocean breezes that come on shore. As you look around, you'll see the vegetation is pretty low. The plants that live on this side of the peninsula all have to be adjusted to salty conditions, dry conditions, and some wind as well. So in this maritime succulent scrub, we of course have our cactuses. There's a little fishhook cactus that is here. And again, if you see a close-up of that, you might say, well, that one's died. But it hasn't really. It's just in that dormant period. With a little bit of rain, it will green up and bloom. And then here we have a cholla. There's a couple of these that are scattered about. These are kind of interesting little cactuses as well. And then over that direction we have what's called a chalk leaf deadlia. And this is the one that our visitors most often say, that looks like it came from aliens, because it has this long tall stalk on it. The blooms are this red waxy looking bloom, but it's called chalk leaf deadlia, and deadlia is the genus of it. And moving a little bit more into adaptations, you know, we talked about how this stuff is all dormant now. Back behind me is actually a plant that stays green all year long. This is called lemonade berry back behind us, and it has some leaves that are very typical of many plants in this region. If you can imagine, if plants don't get any rain all summer long, they're going to need some characteristics to help them keep from being eaten by deer or by rabbits or squirrels. We don't have deer anymore on the peninsula, but we do have a lot of other things that browse and graze on them. So many of the leaves are small leaves. They're very waxy to try to maintain moisture. Some of the leaves actually will curl up to try to contain moisture and keep it from evaporating as readily. A lot of plants here are just like the trees in the winter up in our northern climates. They lose their leaves during the summer. So there's a species over there that's called a boxthorn, and it doesn't have anything on it now, but in the winter it gets these tiny little green leaves on it, kind of needle-like looking leaves. So those are all some different adaptations of things that occur.
On the eastern side of the peninsula are two other scrub communities, the San Diego coastal sage scrub and the maritime chaparral. Supporting taller plants in general, each is made up of its own distinctive collection of plants and animals. All three chaparral ecosystems make Cabrillo National Monument perhaps the most biologically diverse group of pocket habitats in the western United States. Habitats Juan Cabrillo would have encountered when landing here over 465 years ago. In 1542, Juan Cabrillo, while captaining a squad of 3 Spanish ships, noticed a natural harbor. A harbor that today is the dominant geographic feature of present-day San Diego.
They put into San Diego as part of their mapping expedition. They were also looking for fresh water. And they stayed in what is now San Diego Bay area for about 6 days.
Soon after his visit, Cabrillo died of complications from an accident, never to return to his homeland. It would take more than 200 years before Spain occupied the land that Cabrillo claimed for her. In 1769, Father Junipero Serra, after traveling an overland route, met with 2 Spanish ships in San Diego Harbor and began the process of making California a thriving Spanish colony. Once there, the good father worked tirelessly to establish a series of missions along the California coast. The first was just a few miles from the Cabrillo Monument. This was followed by 20 more missions, extending through Mission San Juan Capistrano to Santa Barbara Mission, to the final mission north of San Francisco. They were built along the famous El Camino Real, the Royal Road. Today it is known as the 101. These missions, and the presidios built to protect them, were followed by the establishment of a network of haciendas, large Spanish cattle ranches. For a span of almost 300 years, Spain ruled all of California. That Spanish heritage is still celebrated yearly at the San Juan Cabrillo Festival hosted by the monument. It is a festival watched over by Cabrillo National Monument's shining statue of this early intrepid explorer.
Contained within the Oregon Caves National Monument is perhaps the nation's greatest concentration of biodiversity.
There are many caves in America's national park system, but only one that is a marble cave. In a remote part of the Siskiyou Mountains lies an underground cavern known as Oregon Caves. It is the centerpiece of Oregon Caves National Monument, which was designated a monument by the country's 27th president, William Howard Taft, in 1909. Above ground is one of the few old-growth forests left in the region. Never logged because of its rugged, steep terrain, it is an old-growth forest made up of many micro-ecosystems. Plant communities found nowhere else in the region, and maybe in the world. The monument also contains one of the region's architectural treasures, the Oregon Caves Chateau. Completed in 1934, it is a place frozen in time. No phones, nor TV. Inside and out, one experiences an earthy surrealism.
Is 6 stories, but looks like it's only 3, depending on which side of the building you're on. The number and type of windows changes on every face of it. It's a wonderful design, it's very functional, but it's also very complex. It looks sometimes simpler than it really is, and it even has a stream that runs through the dining room, as well as this lovely Port Orford cedar bark sheathing that it was used on the outside.
But the main attraction is the cave itself. Naturalist Elizabeth Hale takes people on tours of this underground wonderland.
We're standing at the main entrance of Oregon Caves. Oregon Caves is formed in a marble block in the Siskiyou-Klamath Mountains. It totals about 3 miles of passage, and being a marble cave makes it unique among other types of solution caves which are formed by water, because most of those caves are limestone. I'd say about 90%. And Oregon Caves is one of the only marble caves in the Park Service.
Marble is metamorphized limestone. Dancing around on the marble walls, just a few feet inside the cave, are hundreds of harvestmen. Sometimes called daddy longlegs, these arachnids have especially long legs, will eat almost anything, and unlike spiders, do not spin webs. Nearby are cave moths.
We've walked deeper into the cave now, and we're in the first room where we have cave formations. These are calcite formations that have formed on the walls and the ceiling. If you look up at the ceiling, we have many stalactites hanging tight to the ceiling, and that actually gives the room its name, Petrified Gardens, because those look sort of like carrots growing from the top.
Stalactites grow from the ceiling, and there are many splendid examples in the cave. Stalagmites rise up from the floor. Both are formed from the slow dissolving of the marble by weak acids carried by water and then redeposited as calcite. Calcite is the primary mineral in both limestone and marble. This basic process forms all the formations in the cave.
These are Douglas fir tree roots. Often with cave life, you will have areas with nothing and then clusters of a lot here or a lot there. And this will be one of those places where you have a lot of life clustering because the tree roots provide energy into an energy-limited environment. So occasionally we will see millipedes, crickets, spiders, harvestmen, even ants on these roots. These roots are also growing different types of fungi, like these white spots here and this tiny little mushroom down here. The connecting tunnel was blasted and chipped out by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. It connects two parts of the cave that were already connected by ladders, but now we can just walk between those two parts.
Ahead are some of the more spectacular rooms. Along the way, we can see the process of cave formation building as the water drops from a growing stalactite to a drip pool below. Over thousands of years, they may join and form a column that looks like this.
Unlike many of the other calcite formations in the cave, this one has a biological history. This is dried moon milk. And moon milk is a formation caused by the interaction of a bacteria and calcite. And so you get these funny looking clumped formations, which is the reason we call this room the imagination room. Moon milk has been known for many years from many other caves. When moon milk is wet, it has a consistency like cottage cheese or cream cheese. In caves in Europe 500 years ago or more, moon milk was collected by the farmers and used on the wounds of their livestock. It seemed to help them heal. We now know that's because the bacteria in moon milk is very similar to the bacteria in Neosporin.
The most spectacular formations in every cave are the massive flowstones. Oregon Caves is no exception. In this cave, there is one flowstone that is special.
This flowstone formation that we call Niagara Falls has a lot of very old signatures on it. Some of them go back to 1885 and also the late 1800s, when visitors used to come through the cave at the 110 entrance, sign their name to say, hey, I'd been here, I'd done something. When Oregon Caves was protected in 1909, no more signatures were allowed. And in fact, within 10 years of that, the people working at the caves came in to try to clean these signatures off of this formation. These were just written with pencil. So they scrubbed them and they tried to get them off, but they would not come off. They discovered that a layer of calcite had already formed on top of the existing signatures, encasing them in there forever.
The last of the great cave formations are draperies. These massive shapes resembling drapes hang from the ceiling. Every cave has a grand room.
Well, I'm in the ghost room. It's the largest room in the cave. I'm standing at about 220 feet below the surface right here. That's the deepest point you go on the tour route. Other deep parts of the cave can go as deep as 300 feet. Standing right here in the ghost room, I can actually see the three major rock groups. You don't see that in most caves. We can see sedimentary, metamorphic, and igneous rock. Of course, the metamorphic rock is the marble. That's the bedrock. That's the rock the cave is formed in. Our calcite formations are limestone, and the igneous rock is actually this intrusion that cuts through the center of the room.
Near one of the cave's exits, a startling discovery was made.
Oregon Caves has a very rich deposit of bones that are some of them very old. These right here are black bear bones. These were discovered when the trail, the cave tour route trail, was being resurfaced. These are probably about 3,000 years old based on the layer of sediment they were found in.
There is no other cave quite like the unique marble cave at Oregon Caves National Monument.
Let's say, logging has been Oregon's primary industry for much of the 20th century, and it has begun to fade in the last 10 to 20 years.
In many ways, the history of the region is the history of logging and forestry. America, from the time of the first settlement at Jamestown, has been blessed with an abundance of timber. Forests extended up and down the East Coast, across the Appalachian Mountains, and into the Great Lakes region. Most of these forests were cut down in the name of progress and creating farmland. Then, when it seemed America would run out of forests to harvest, the Pacific Northwest was opened to settlement. It became a region built on logging. Lumber boom towns sprung up everywhere. Great logs were transported down the region's abundant rivers to the newly emerging lumber port cities of Seattle and Portland. But just when it seemed all the trees would be cut down, a new idea emerged: conservation.
So when you hear the term conservation, for this period, for the latter part of the 19th century, what is being conserved is, well, to put it very simply, water. But of course, everything that's related to the conservation of water, forest watersheds. So national forests were one of the early manifestations of this conservation movement because it was important to set aside these large areas of forests, in the, especially in the mountains, to preserve them from being, it wasn't to prevent them from being logged, but it was to control and regulate the economic activities like logging, but also mining, but primarily logging that occurred up there so that they wouldn't be stripped bare. So that the resources, again, particularly water, would last and would be there for future generations. In a nutshell, that's the early conservation movement.
The result of this movement was a system of national and state forests. However, in this area, much of the forest land is in private hands. Walking one of the trails winding through Oregon Caves National Monument, it is possible to see the typical second-growth forests, clear-cutting, and then replanting with a single tree species. But much of forestry has entered a new age, the age of silviculture. This is a way of managing forests by thinning trees rather than clear-cutting, of replanting so that there are trees of multiple species at different ages. This protects the biodiversity of the forest, strengthening its ability to sequester carbon dioxide and counteract the impacts of global warming. One of the great values of an old-growth forest, such as this one, preserved in the monument, is that it is a laboratory for understanding how a healthy forest ecosystem functions. An understanding that may be critically important as climate change affects our nation's forests. Old-growth forests are special places. Sometimes called ancient woodlands, they are oases of tranquility and peace that have a magical restorative quality. A quality that is experienced when walking along the trails at Oregon Caves National Monument. Unlike second-growth forests, which are almost exclusively made up of a single tree species, almost exclusively of trees of the same size, an old-growth forest contains multiple species, trees of all sizes, not only all sizes, but all ages. The forest here contains the rare Port Orford cedar, a conifer that is not a cedar at all, but a member of the cypress family. The forest here has some of the largest Douglas firs you'll ever see, and the big leaf maple whose leaves turn a bright yellow in the fall. Typical of this and other old-growth forests are canopy openings, where sunlight can penetrate to the floor. The floor has a bumpy topography from the remains of old dead tree falls, and there are other tree falls that are in various stages of decay and repopulation by ferns and mosses.
Because you have all those factors at play, you can literally go just a few feet and be into kind of a new plant association, where you have, say, the dominant overstory changes, and what's beneath, whether shrubs or herbaceous plants, they change too.
In other words, ones of great biodiversity. Islands of biodiversity which have shrunk to virtually nothing. Here is a sequence of maps showing the disappearance of old-growth forests or virgin timber. This sequence of maps makes it clear what a treasure this stand of old-growth forest is. One complemented by the underground splendor beneath its roots.
I hope you enjoyed seeing the plants and animals of the Pacific Northwest. Thanks for watching. I'm Jordan Murphy.